It's the Iron Man trilogy versus the Captain America trilogy versus the Thor trilogy. No, not the Thor trilogy. No one will vote for that. Okay, the first two then, on movie Feuds. The MCU sure has been a wild ride, kids, with a lot of colorful characters popping up through every phase of this thing. Everyone knows none of this would have been possible without Robert Downey Jr.'s portrayal of Tony Stark, the billionaire genius playboy who traded in his business suit for an armored one. Joining him is his best buddy Rhodey, played by Terrence Howard and then upgraded or downgraded depending on who you ask to Don Cheadle in subsequent films. Chris Evans as Steve Rogers doesn't quite have the lifestyle Stark does. The army runt who dreams of nothing more than to serve his country, proves anything is possible. No matter what physical disabilities you may have, as long as you keep that chin up, stay vigilant, and get enrolled in some sort of super secret military operation which turns you into a super soldier, you'll be just fine. Not to be outdone by Iron Man, Captain America gets his own sidekick in Winter Soldier, Anthony Mackie's Falcon, if that wasn't clear. I think the real bromance here, though, takes place between Rogers and BFF James Bucky Barnes, played by Sebastian Stan. A friendship that unfortunately cools off for around 70 years before thawing out and becoming stronger than ever before. The other constants in both these pictures are the love interests. Gwyneth Paltrow's Pepper Potts and Haley Atwell's less dumb name, Peggy Carter. Iron Man 1 and 2 director Jon Favreau, yes, he somehow directed both of these films, also remains a constant. Hogan would not only climb the ranks with Stark Industries, but would also have multiple opportunities to babysit Spider-Man and hit on his aunt. Outside the mainstays, we have a couple of crossover characters from mostly S.H.I.E.L.D. agents, Black Widow, Nick Fury, and Agent Coulson. The real separator is the villains. That was me separating, and I have to say, they are remarkably unremarkable in most cases. Iron Man 1 gives us a couple with Raza and Obadiah Stane. I mean, it's kind of in the name, Stane, spelt incorrectly, but he's a stain on the company as a whole. He's dealing arms underneath the table. He also covertly hired a team of scientists to build his own rocket ship version of Iron Man, in record time, might I add, and he really got the hang of it instantaneously. Iron Man 2 opts for the villain double feature as well with Ivan Vanko and Justin Hammer. Whiplash was unfortunately very underutilized, and let's be honest, the weapon's not practical in the slightest. What was he thinking? The two-villain trend continues in Iron Man 3. That is, until it's revealed that the Mandarin is nothing more than a misdirection, a prop of sorts, an actor working for Aldrich Killian. This upset a lot of comic book fans who were looking forward to seeing the Mandarin realized on the big screen. Pepper Potts, dressed up as Sonya Blade, doing her best yoga moves against a bunch of enemies, may have saved some face for some of those guys, I don't know. Speaking of yoga moves, let's talk Captain America and why it's important to write down your segues ahead of time. Hugo Weaving as Red Skull certainly stands out. Could be due to the fact that he's a Hydra general who wants to take over the world. Or perhaps it's because his face looks like it was soaked in some new brand of Kool-Aid. Scab. In the Captain America sequel, Steve isn't the only super soldier ghost from Christmas past. His longtime pal Bucky has a bit of a chip on his shoulder, it would seem. Guy's not happy. That is until it's revealed there is a sinister conspiracy at play that reaches the top of the chain of command. Robert Redford's Alexander Pierce is not all that he seems to be, and between you and me, he strikes me as one of those dudes that has just tats everywhere. Hydra snakes, serpentining around each other, coiled up. He probably lashes himself at night. Just seems like a real freak in bed. Real freak in the sheets. It's enough to make any sane person say, "Hail Hydra?" Hail no. Hell no. It's almost unfair to even call Captain America Civil War a Captain America film, considering the sheer amount of people involved. It feels like another Avengers film. Most of the cast is in it, and some newcomers like Black Panther hit the MCU as well. The villain here is a bit more nuanced, as Zemo is nothing more than your average bear. Common man. A man who just so happens to hate the Avengers due to the devastation they caused him. Guy must have taken a couple arts and crafts classes because he sows doubt left and right. Really, this thing boils down to a battle of ethics. And who's on the right side of history? Between the 6 of these flicks, there is an overwhelming amount of star power, and I would be foolish if I thought I could list them all. I just wanted to get some of the primary characters noted. You know these films. We all know these films. Let's talk story a bit. 2008's Iron Man sure seems quaint when you stack it up next to everything that's come since. Yet this smaller tale is still also one of the MCU's best. Tony has his eyes open when he sees the devastation his own weapons have caused in the Middle East. He realized that it's time for him to not only take some responsibility, but also move the company in a different direction. And he probably never even would have come to this conclusion if it weren't for the whole, being a prisoner of war, held up in a cave with some other dude while secretly working on a weapon of mass destruction that you can wear, pilot around, and raid down a fire of hell on your enemies, all in the guise of building them a nuclear weapon. Brilliant. I've never really been a fan of the first Captain America movie. I don't think it's terrible, but I also don't ever need to watch it again. That said, I do think it fares better after watching all the movies that would follow. Chris Evans as Captain America is just as brilliant of casting as Robert Downey was as Iron Man. Going back to the first Avenger and seeing the foundation of so many great characters definitely has value. There are some fantastic lines lifted from this first film. That and the fact that the Hydra, the Tesseract, and so much more become such important pieces of the MCU puzzle, Captain America becomes a must-watch, even if it's not the most exciting one. It was going to be hard for Iron Man 2 to match the level of greatness the first did, so it didn't even try. Instead, it spends a dumb amount of time on the sidelines as the script builds up the MCU further. There is a lot of Avengers lead up and some really odd storylines. The mansion fight between Rhodes and Stark is a whole bag of nonsense. And even though Rourke and Rockwell are great actors, their villains are not. I think if it was just focused on one of them, it would have gone a lot smoother. Oh yes, and Tony is also being slowly killed by the very thing keeping him alive. A compelling storyline that, like all the rest here, never reaches the crescendo it should. Winter Soldier has very little in common with its predecessor. The Russo brothers take over and bring Captain into the 21st century in a much more intense way. There are Hydra plants within the S.H.I.E.L.D. agency that set out to frame Steve Rogers. He's now a fugitive on the run. This is one of the consistent themes that go through all three Captain America flicks. Steve Rogers is about as good as a man can get. He doesn't just answer blindly to the rules of law if those rules were written by the wrong men. He's out for truth, justice, and the American way. Black Widow and Fury get a good amount of time here, but unlike in Iron Man 2, their inclusions advance the story instead of hinder it. Even though Winter Soldier plays out like a slick spy thriller, there's plenty of downtime for some nice quiet moments, such as Rogers going to a World War II museum and visiting the love of his life, Peggy. And I have to say, if it was me visiting her, she's not aging like a fine wine. I think I'd just walk away. Winter Soldier is considered by many to be a top 5 MCU film and a vast improvement over the previous entry, while Iron Man 2 did the opposite. So far, I'd say these trilogies are pretty even Steven. Sorry. For me, Iron Man 3 is a far better flick than Iron Man 2. The focus on Tony is much greater this time as he tries to navigate a universe far more expanded than he previously knew. One that contains powerful gods, alien enemies, and has huge consequences for the entire world if handled improperly. The PTSD is done well here, and I thought the kid companion was a fun dynamic change. I enjoy seeing Tony have to use his wits to mangle together some random science experiments to get out of a quick encounter. And I thought the Killian adversary was far more interesting than the ones he previously faced. A fellow scientist who Tony brushed off years earlier has come back and seeked his revenge. Director Shane Black was perfect at delivering a fast-paced action comedy with good heart, which leaves us with Civil War, a gigantic blockbuster event, unlike anything in the previous entries of either film. It's a massive movie that plays off events from the past, primarily Avengers 2. It turns out a lot of people died in Sokovia, and they put the blame squarely on the Avengers. Tony kinda does too, and wants to make sure they're kept in check in case things get out of hand. Rogers knows all too well what happens when corrupt politicians stick their nose where it doesn't belong. Civil War may be a Captain America movie as far as the title is concerned, but Stark has just as much story here as Steve Rogers. And I think I mentioned this movie's huge, but that cannot be overstated enough. Besides the main conflict between the two leads, there are a ton of smaller storylines, such as the rise of Black Panther, Spider-Man being welcomed into the MCU, Vision and Wanda's relationship issues, Hawkeye having to miss a round of golf, a blossoming bromance between Falcon and Bucky, who it turns out is being brainwashed by Hydra. Bucky, not Falcon. He's fine. Hydra's all over the place in this. The movie has a TV season's amount of content and easily could have been broken into a two-parter. Yet the Russo brothers managed to get it done pretty well in one. For all the spectacle and fan service though, Civil War really manages to bring Steve's journey full circle with some great closure. He saves his best friend Bucky, he doesn't falter on his principles, and he is once more on his own righteous mission with a small group of loyal friends. The Iron Man trilogy by contrast, isn't as cohesive, at least not in the script department. It does, however, look the part, and we're going to talk about that now. I would just like to say I enjoy the presentation of the Iron Man films. Film in the MCU can tend to be a bit too bright and lack contrast. The Iron Man flicks don't fall into that category, as Favre and Black know how to play with the shadows and add a bit of edge to the things. Throwing in some Ozzy Osbourne in the trailer and a little AC/DC go a long way to just add more to the Stark character. The dude is pure rock and roll. The progression of Iron Man's armor styles and how Stark suits up differently is just a blast to watch as well. Equally as fun are the ways he trial and errors his problems, working on his suits, working on the tech, seeing the failures, seeing the successes. The action for the most part isn't ever really that exciting or often even the focus. The first film barely has any Iron Man fighting, yet it's still one of the best MCU flicks out there. And I think that's because of the smaller scale to everything. It looks real, it feels real. There's some CGI at play, but for the most part it feels like Tony's in the suit. And that's because there is a good amount of CGI, but there's also a good amount of practical, plasticky, armory effects. You know, he's wearing a suit in a lot of cases. Which is later it's just being built on him, so it kind of takes away a little bit of that realism. As well as the Captain America stories work, I think there is a lack of cohesion when it comes to the visuals. Mainly because the first one takes place in the 40s, and then we're brought up to speed in the second and third. Director Joe Johnston does a good job of showcasing the time period with the clothing, with the vehicles, and everything, even the way that people talk. The bigger dramatic shift for me isn't even that though, it's the way that the films are shot and presented. The Russos opt for a less steady camera to match the often frantic tone. First Avengers goes for a softer look that often has a pulpy, campy vibe to it. Cap's uniforms get the appropriate upgrades over time too, but obviously not the dramatic effect Iron Man does. The music changes between these films too, and even though there's a theme song running between them, it's still pretty night and day overall. So tonally, I think Iron Man just feels like a three-part act, where Captain America feels almost like thrown into his own movies here and there just because of how it looks. Listen, I could do this all day, but it's time to wrap up. I think for most this is really going to boil down to the last entry of both. Iron Man 1 is better than First Avenger. Winter Soldier trounces Iron Man 2. Civil War is a gigantic film, while Iron Man 3 is a much smaller, character-driven story. Let's hear from the audience in the YouTube poll that you can find right here on Adam Does Movies. You should subscribe if you haven't. It's a blast. It's a fun time here. I'll wait while you do that now. Just hit the subscribe button. Okay, I've waited long enough. As awesome as Iron Man is, the films just couldn't keep up with Captain. Just 31% were Team Tony, which makes Captain America the winner at 69%. I myself am a bit torn on this. If Iron Man 2 just wasn't so bad for me, I'd probably pick Iron Man. Because I think 1 and 3 are great. I know, 3 can really turn people off, but for me, I think it's a fine film. And First Avengers just a snore fest for me as well. But the second two are great, and the Russos know what they're doing. So yeah, I guess I side with the winners this time. I guess I side with the Captain America side of things. And that's that. I'm going to be sprinkling in quite a few more of these MCU movie feuds because why not? The people seem to want them. But in between, I'm going to be doing some stuff I enjoy. For instance, the next episode is going to be Clash of the Titans, the 1981 version, versus the 2010 critically panned one that I, for some reason, enjoy. So please stay tuned for that coming up soon. And remember, this is more than just reviews. This is Movie Feuds. Thanks for watching the video. I try to put out new stuff on a weekly basis, so make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. I have a second channel full of more shenanigans, and I'm also on Twitch now. So there's a lot of variety, a lot of options, and hopefully you can find these channels via links on this video itself, if I did my job correctly. Otherwise, they might be in the description below, or you can just visit the channel page. All right, take care.